Hello, everybody. My name is Lat Mackey, and this is Games Done Classic, where we look back at legendary GDQ moments with the legends that made them happen. And we have got, once again, another great episode for you today. If you are in the chat right now and you are watching, we are live, so feel free. You can participate. Feel free to throw in any questions, chat away. We will try to incorporate what we can into our conversation today. It's going to be a lot of fun. Thank you so much for being here. Part of the GDQ Hotfix here on a Sunday afternoon if you're live in the chat. Otherwise, you might be watching this on YouTube as a VOD. So thank you so much for supporting everything that we're doing here at the GDQ Hotfix. A couple of quick announcements before we get started. If you are interested in volunteering for the upcoming SGDQ 2021 online, the volunteer submissions are closed. But we're going to be opening up a second round where we still are going to need volunteers. So if you're at all interested, stay tuned to our Twitter feed and our website where we will open up some additional volunteer applications then. We would love to have you, and thank you so much for considering it. Frame Fatales, the all-women speedrunning event, is coming up and returning August 15th through the 21st. This time it's called Flame Fatales. Now, if that's not a name, I don't know what is. How cool is that? If you'd like to see the game submissions and other relevant dates, head over to GamesDoneQuick/Frame Fatales for all of the information. If you're watching this on YouTube right now and you would like to support our live content we have here at the GDQ Hotfix, please consider checking out our Twitch channel at twitch.tv/GDQ. If you have an Amazon Prime account, you can subscribe to any Twitch channel of your choice every month for free. Please consider using your Prime Game account on the GDQ Twitch channel. All of that goes to support the great content you are watching and supporting right now as part of the GDQ Hotfix. Information on all of our Hot Quick shows is available at GamesDoneQuick/Hotfix. And from there, you can find out information on submitting your own runs to any of our weekly shows. Tomorrow on the GDQ Hotfix, we will have our community spotlight with the start of Ocean Week. Folks, we've got a whole entire week dedicated to ocean content. It's going to be awesome. We are partnering with Monterey Bay Aquarium for this ocean-themed speedruns and puns aplenty starting at 7 p.m. Eastern tomorrow, Monday, on the GDQ Hotfix. Well, here it is, folks. Welcome to Games Done Classic. As I mentioned, we're going to be looking back at some legendary moments in GDQ history and in speedrunning history this week. Specifically, we are looking at Zelda 1 and Zelda 2 on the NES, the Nintendo Entertainment System, and we have a host of wonderful legendary characters to join us to chat about today. Today's guests are going to be Breakdown, Darkwing Duck, Lack Attack, Feasel, and Eon. And the first thing we're going to get to is we're going to take a step back. Imagine trying to picture yourself 11 years ago today. Classic Games Done Quick, the very first ever GDQ speedrunning event. And to join and chat a little bit about the very first ever Z1 and Z2 runs, we have some people who were actually there during that first event. And I am excited and to welcome and to meet for the first time, actually in person, Breakdown. Breakdown, how you doing? Thanks so much for being here.
Doing all right. Thanks for having me, certainly. Good to be here.
And of course, it wouldn't be a GDQ without seeing this person on screen as well. Feasel, thank you so much for being here. How are you doing?
Great, thank you.
I am excited to chat some Z1 and some Z2 with y'all. And I guess first, I'm going to start with you, Breakdown, because you were the person who actually ran Z1 and Z2 at the very first event. How did you get involved? How did this whole Classic Games Done Quick thing start for you?
Mostly came down to around the time there was this group called the Speed Gamers doing charity events, and the fact that they called themselves the Speed Gamers basically had a bunch of us in the speedrunning community from Speed Devil's Archive, basically just thinking we could do a better speed marathon, a better marathon that involves going fast, certainly. And that's kind of how that all started. It started off with an initial very disorganized thread where people were like, I could play this game and I could play this game, but no real plan behind it. And then another thread appeared with like, we're going to do this at this time. Who can actually be in attendance at this time? So most of the initial planning came through the SDA forums, the SDARC chats from the time back in 2009. We were a much smaller group at that time, but came together. And we had this event in 2009, as remarkable as that is.
Had you been speedrunning Zelda 1 or Zelda 2 at this time? Like, what's kind of your history with the game itself as well?
Zelda 2 was actually my very first speed run. At the time of the event, I had a run on the site for Deathless No Up A. It was in like 117, which was pretty good at the time. But yeah, Zelda 2 was my real first foray into speedrunning. Zelda 1, I ended up playing this as a result of I didn't think we could have a marathon called Classic Games Done Quick without having Zelda 1. So I said, I will play Zelda 1 for this event, even though I had no experience with the game at the time I offered it. That's definitely something that might be a little shocking to modern GDQ attendees. Like, yes, we just picked. I said I was going to play this game with having no background in it at the time, and proceeded to learn it over the course of a few months so we could have it at the event. So that's how we got here.
On this show, we quite often hear too about how many people had to do multiple game runs of different games for this very first GDQ. How many runs did you have at the first one?
First event, I had 7 games total.
Wow. Okay. How do you prepare for something like that? I mean, that's just so many runs.
Well, you practice and you use fairly safe strats, especially for the case of Zelda 1. Anyone familiar with the CGDQ Zelda 1, it's a conservative route. I think conservative's a friendly adjective to attach to that particular run. But it got through the game. I had fun doing it. If anyone wants to beat the game inside of an hour, then that's a good route to do it with. But yeah, planning for 7 games. I didn't have any that were complete train wrecks, so that worked out pretty good. It was mostly games I had at least some experience with coming into the event. Zelda 1 being the big exception.
That's it's really interesting to kind of hear about it. And so I guess, Fisa, I'm going to throw this over to you as well then. How many runs did you have at the very first CGDQ? And how did you even hear about it or get involved in it as well? Is it similar to Breakdowns?
Maybe. I had 3 runs, I believe. I did River City Ransom, I did Bionic Commando, and I did Adventures of Lolo.
Nice.
And those were, I was pretty active on the SDA site at the time, and basically Mike Uyama reached out to me and some other people and just messaged some of the people who were more prolific runners at that moment and just, tried to get runs from them. And those are the 3 games that I offered. I didn't have to learn any of them specifically for the event, fortunately, but yeah, even 3 games, it was a lot of work. And, I remember Freddie Anderson did 9 games, and like Andrew G did something like 11 games or something like that. There was a lot of people who really pulled like extra duty there, just getting enough runs into that marathon, because there weren't really a lot of people there at the house, so everyone had to do multiples.
Breakdown or Fiesel, were any of you involved in some of the planning of making the event happen? Because it seems like there were so few people there. It seems like people had to have double dipped on duties and things like that.
Well, there was really only so much in the way of actual organizing, and most of the plans that were laid had to get scrapped at the last second. The original plan was to have this be held at MagFest, but MagFest, the hotel, was changing internet providers, and so there was no actual internet at the hotel, like no usable internet for a stream.
Might be a problem if you're trying to host a live event on a live streaming platform.
Just a little bit. Out there somewhere does exist some like slideshow footage of us actually at the event. Andrew G trying to get off the ground with Mega Man 1. But basically, that was kind of our entire plan. We actually had some other groups that were at the event that were going to help out with commentary. Like Rental Floss was supposed to do some time on the mic. ScrewAttack.com, some of those guys were supposed to help out. And yeah, we had this big plan, and then it got basically wrecked because we couldn't have our event at our venue. So we just bundled up everything we could, and we drove across town to Mike's house and set up in his basement. And this is where that footage you're seeing right now comes from. The actual lead up to the event, most of it was in Mike's hands. I helped out a little bit, but in terms of actual putting it together, Nate was the main tech guy for the event of SDA. And yeah, no, it's kind of a marvel this thing came together the way it did, but it worked out in the end.
It's kind of interesting to just make assumptions as a viewer, you know, seeing the video and all the things that were actually happening. That we have the webcam footage, we have the gameplay footage. I wondered if either of you could, or both of you actually, could describe your experience. I'll start with you, breakdown a little bit of just what was the experience like. Is it as fun as we're seeing? Because it seems like everyone, as much as it could have had to have been stressful, it seems like people were having a good time and enjoying the event. Was it that way? I mean, is the community? What was the community experience like being there?
Well, this was kind of more like a site meetup, really, than anything. It's like just about everybody at this thing was like very active in the community. There was like people like you'd known for years in a lot of instances. It's just you'd never actually met them. Once you got past that little weird little dichotomy, like it was a little awkward at the start. Definitely, it was definitely more stressful at the start when we're actually trying, you know, get everything off the ground after a high risk of it not looking like it can get off the ground. But once people settled in, yeah, it was just basically like, you know, being in a room with like 19 of your best friends and just playing some video games and talking about them, and people on the internet watching and saying, hey, that's pretty cool. And yeah, so once it settled in, it just definitely got like a real, like, you know, like homey, like almost like, you know, just get together kind of vibe. And yeah, it was a special event. It definitely was.
Fiesel, was this your first live event? Had you done any of these, something like this before at all?
It was my first live event. That's right. Yeah, that was the first time, and this was pre-streaming. I mean, I don't think anyone there was a streamer, so we didn't really know even what each other looked like unless someone had happened to show up at MagFest. I mean, MagFest was a thing that had been going on for years, and a number of people from SDA did generally attend and would meet up a little bit. You know, there'd be a handful of SDA people, but I never went to it, so this was my first time, you know, meeting anyone, seeing anyone in person, playing, or it's just even speedrunning in front of anyone. It was just something I had been doing, you know, on my own and recording it, you know, like offline recording it and then uploading it to SDA and YouTube and such. So it was a very different experience, actually, like getting together and playing with the group.
Well, that's like, I'm glad you brought up SDA and kind of the community back at that time period. How were you able to, like, I mean, maybe it didn't happen. I don't know. How were you able to share strats and ideas? I mean, was there a forum? Was there message boards? Was there any type of that communication? Or is this something you mentioned? It sounds like you might have been doing a lot of it just kind of on your own, recording your own gameplay.
Yeah, I mean, SDA forums were just it was like the pinnacle of speedrun knowledge. It was amazing. Like I would check that, like every day I would wake up in the morning, check for new posts, you know, and check it again at lunch. Like this was, everything that was happening in speedrunning was in SDA forums. There was really no other place to get information. You know, there were some people working on game facts who would sometimes like put in information that was helpful to speedrunners, but like the only places where speedrunners ever collected their knowledge was at SDA or at TAS Video's forums. I think the SDA forums were written by Nate as well, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
Current forum software is his, yes.
Yeah, back then it might not have been, right? I think we were using something else.
Simple Machines, I think. It was definitely like a stock forum at that point, and then switched over to Taiga at like 2012, 2013, I want to say, but digression.
Yeah. But yeah, that was really the main tool for communication. That's what we were all just watching those boards all day.
We're going to get into Z1 in just a bit, but I guess I'll start with maybe breakdown. You could, what kind of categories existed for Z1 at this time period? I know now we have a robust leaderboard, but what kind of existed at that time?
There wasn't too much for Zelda 1 on SDA at that point in time. Basically, there was any percent up A, any percent no up A, and like second quest runs. But really, like, there weren't too many active players of the game. Like, I think the runs that were on the site at that point were from TSA, eventually being removed and then replaced with the Tom Vadava's runs. And that was really before, you know, Darkwing Duck and Lack Attack really started diving into the game. But in the initial going, like, Zelda 1 was not a very active game on SDA at all. There weren't really too many active, like, runners of the game. There were fans of the game, but there weren't really runners of it.
And I guess I could ask, because you mentioned you were speedrunning Z2 at the time, breakdown. Was Z2 similar to that, or was it the same type of thing at the time? Or what were the categories like for Z2?
Somewhat similar. There was, let's see, New Game Plus, any percent with death abuse, any percent with no death abuse. Actually, when I got my start with it was not long after the first any percent no death abuse run got posted. It was like a 1:18:30, I think, by Tommy Montgomery. And completely independent of knowing that was coming, I decided it's like, I'm going to try to go fast in Zelda 2. That sounds like fun. And yeah, that ended up being a competition point, and yeah, discussing strats with Tommy on the boards. So that was probably at the time the most active category because it had 2 active players for it. But yeah, again, like not like a huge presence, but slightly larger than Zelda 1. There really wasn't anybody actively working on Zelda 1 at the time.
Fiesel, when did you pick up Z2? And is it something that you had? When did you pick up Z2? Let's start with that, actually.
Gosh, it probably would have been about like 2011 or so. It was not so long after I started streaming, maybe 2011 or 12. I started streaming, I guess, 2011, I think. And I really started out, it was because of using SRL. I actually didn't even pick it up so that I could speedrun it. I just picked it up to race it. I mean, before that, I really wasn't even planning on racing it. It's just that I would watch. I was a big fan of like Arctic Eagle and the runs that he'd been posting to SDA. He was really the big guy in Zelda 2 at that time. And I was just experimenting with, can I get through Death Mountain in the dark? Because that was kind of a strat that I think a couple people had done, but it really wasn't being done very much. And I just wanted to see if I could do it, and I just wanted something to practice. So I was just sort of save state practicing my way through Death Mountain on stream. And then I found another runner at the time named Chum, who said that he'd race me in it because he was also interested in that category. And so we just raced through, just did Dark Death Mountain races because that was kind of the most fun part for both of us. And then other people eventually wanted to do some racing, and really it was just through SRL, Speedruns Live, that we really started to kind of develop the game, some of the strats, and man, it was that was kind of the start of something big, because that game really started to take off eventually when more people started getting into it. I think it was one of the early tournaments, one of the earliest tournaments that happened on SRL. Was for Zelda 2, and that's when it really started to sort of pick up the player base, and when the all keys category started to become kind of like the main category that everyone was interested in.
I've switched over the video to Z2 so we can get a little taste of that as well, because Breakdown, you did both of these runs back in the day, and I'm hoping we get a little taste of both of them before we actually get on to some of the bigger speedrunning strats and history part of this thing. It's really interesting to see where the game has come from and to kind of see some of these early things. And one of the things that Mike Kuyama has talked about for classic games done quick is that they didn't expect the amount of people to be watching it that happened at the time. And so getting a chance, Breakdown, when you were doing these runs, were you aware that the stream had caught a little bit of a popularity? Like, where is this in the marathon time frame at that point?
Well, I was definitely aware there was 4-figure people watching me, which was kind of insane at that particular time. I mean, we actually broke Ustream. We got enough viewers to break Ustream, which we were very pleased about until we lost all our viewers because we broke Ustream. But yeah, I don't know, nerves were real. Like Fiesel was saying, streaming wasn't really a thing for any of us individually at this point. Speedrunning was just something we did in the privacy of our own homes. We'd maybe get a video together, ship it off for public viewing once we had our final product. The idea of actually just sitting down and doing a run live was kind of foreign to all of us. So yeah, there was definitely, nerves were a factor. I got to say, once I was actually had the controller in my hand and was playing, I was actually fairly calm. It's happened with basically every GDQ run I've ever done, is in the lead up to it, I'm a ball of nerves. But as soon as I actually sit down and get the controller in my hand and just set in and do it. But yeah, no, it was definitely a cool thing, certainly for me at the time, just knowing that a lot of people are watching this, and I'm just gonna sit here and do what I do. So, exciting thing.
Mike was nice enough to share with us too how the stream worked back then, and the video we're watching right now was actually edited after the fact. There was a webcam stream and a gameplay stream, and so that's it was nonstop. The webcam never stops. It's kind of interesting just to see how that that there was some editing done for the YouTube VOD or whatever, wherever it was going to reside afterwards to put this whole thing together. So. I don't. Were people even capable of watching 2 streams at once? I don't even know if could you have had them up at the same time back then?
If you had a robust enough computer, certainly. Definitely a lot of like pausing to get things to sync up, try to get everything to sync up just so, time your pauses perfectly.
Yeah. Stream software then it wasn't like it is now where you can just make a scene. In a lot of cases, you would just run something that you could just take one source and pipe it to some RTMP output. So you couldn't like add a timer or add text or anything like that. You could have either your webcam or your capture card, but not both. And you couldn't like lay things out. It was a while before we actually had proper tools to make scenes and things. So I understand why they did 2 different streams. There just weren't tools for doing anything better than that.
So, Fiesel, then, when you were streaming your attempts back then, were you able to at least have a microphone over your gameplay, or was that not even? Was that a little bit too? Was that too much?
So at first I could. Well, see, way back then I couldn't have the microphone and the game audio. I couldn't mix it.
Right.
So I could have the video from the capture card and the audio I would take from my microphone, and I would just put my microphone close to the TV so you could hear both me and the game. Yeah.
This has kind of become a standard question now, but I'm always curious what your thoughts are on this. And that is, breakdown, when you were first doing this run and these runs back then, did you ever imagine, or could you have possibly foreseen speedrunning and GDQ turn into what it is today?
Can't say that I could. Definitely can't see that I could. GDQ specifically, like getting to the point, I remember 2014, our first event in a hotel, like that seemed kind of strange to me. And yeah, now they're week-long events. We've got literal thousands of people registering to attend, literal thousands of people submitting runs to the event. But it all comes back to these humble beginnings of about 20 of us in Mike's basement, and just seeing how far that's come in a span of 11 years. That's just kind of mind-blowing to me. And yeah, no, definitely the guy you see in that grainy webcam footage had no idea of what was coming. No idea. He was just playing Zelda 2 and hoping not to get caught by a bot and knocked into a lava pit. So,
I'm wondering if you have the same thoughts as far as possibly seeing a future for speedrunning become, as large as it has become today.
See, back then I didn't really, because I didn't even really understand the power of streaming then either. I mean, I understood, okay, we're streaming it and maybe a couple of people will watch it or something, but like at that time, being a streamer wasn't a career. I mean, even being like a video maker, like on YouTube, in that sense, wasn't really a career. It was, or it was barely such a thing. And so it didn't really seem like this is the kind of thing that would be more than just like a fun little hobby at the time. But I mean, I think once we really started to see what happened when especially when people started moving from Ustream to Justin TV, precursor to Twitch, that it really sort of start to develop as like a community. Yeah, then it was a little bit easier to see. But back here, like with this footage that you're seeing, 2010 there, none of us had any idea. It was a big surprise, really.
Before we move on, I do have to ask, Breakdown, do you still have this beanie? Does it exist?
I absolutely still do. Wore it this winter. I have that T-shirt still too, actually. But
that is so cool. Okay, I was curious because now is it a different one that we've seen in some of your future runs and appearances later on in the years, or was it?
Oh no, that's the
different?
hat.
Okay.
It is the hat. It's always been the same hat. I'm gonna have to retire it before too long, but I'm loath to do it. So I keep saying one more season for it. It doesn't function very well as a winter hat anymore, I'll say that, but love that thing.
Awesome. Okay, well, thank you both for giving us just a little look back at 2010 and how this whole thing started and where it's about to go, because getting a little taste of these speedruns, we're about to see something that's completely different and some sort of the evolution that is about to happen. Fiesel going to give you a little bit of a break here, but Breakdown's going to stay with us, and I am excited to welcome in our next guest for a look back at Z1 And folks, if you were at all around speedrunning in the early and mid 2010s, you are very familiar then with both of these runners who are still doing speedruns of games today and still very active. Please welcome Darkwing Duck. Darkwing Duck, how you doing? Thank you so much for being here.
Hello, thanks for having me. I don't know very active's the right term, but still active, sure.
And you maybe have one of the best avatars I've seen on this show so far. So thank you very much.
That's the power of good GDQ photographers. Yeah, there is a story behind that picture, by the way.
Please share, yeah.
Well, I'm not the most photogenic of people, and I saw when I was actually doing the run, I saw the cameraman come up and Richard. I've talked to him about, and he was going to take a picture. I'm like, I can't give him a normal look, right? I got to come up with something, and this is actually, I think this was. Which one was this? Goonies 2, which I'm actually doing right now. Might have been Goonies 2. It's either that or Rygar. Might have been Rygar. I can't remember anymore. But so I gave that look, and that ended up being a look that can be used for any emotion known to man.
It's very true. It's got so much usefulness to it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for being here. And obviously, the person, I think right above you or right below you here, right above you on the screen, the one, the only Lack Attack. Lack, thanks so much for joining us and being here and talking a little Zelda 1.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start the video, but we're going to mostly use that as just kind of this background to kind of set the stage. Darkwing Duck, I'm going to first start with you. When did you first start running Z1, and what kind of got you into the game?
August 2011. Is when I first picked it up. And why? Because after the success of the first SGDQ, which was SGDQ of 2011, I had this wild idea of scrounging together whatever money I had and head over to AGDQ, because it would be their third time doing it. And by the time I made that thought, the schedule had already been released, and they're not going to add anything. So the only way I was going to actually play something was to race something. And I looked over the list, and the only thing that seemed like something I could, learn, and as part of my profile, I don't, at that time and still now, really, I only speedrun games that I played as a kid. And it's like, okay, might as well pick that one up and try to learn it. And since, the speedrun route was always starting with level 3, and the safe route, marathon route, started with level 2, I might as well go ahead and learn level 3 and learn how to do it for a marathon. So that was the origins of me learning Zelda.
So simple. Lack, how about you? When did you start running the game, and what made you pick it up?
Well, I started running the game in May of 2013. So I saw AGDQ 2013. It was my first taste of speedrunning. I just found it randomly, or found speedruns randomly on YouTube. I was looking for something else, and I started watching it and was just blown away by by what I was seeing. All kinds of different games with Zelda and Mario and just other different games too. And then I actually came across the race of Zelda 1 between Breakdown and Jay Prophet, and said that, I was like, man, I used to play that game all the time. I was pretty good at it, in my own head, and decided to start speedrunning it. So that run was really the thing that actually got me into it. And I didn't even know that there was a huge community for it. I just decided to play it. And that's pretty much how I got started. So
the run we're looking at right now is AGDQ 2015. Leading up to this point, like you mentioned, the community, and I'll throw this over to either Darkwing Duck, Breakdown, or Lack. How were, because the runs we're looking at right now are completely different than what Breakdown was doing in 2010. What happened, or who were developing strats in the community that found all these screen scrolling? We found so many wonderful new things. How did those come about? Who were the people out there doing this kind of stuff?
I'll start off. Darkwing was really the person who did everything for this game. He was really the main runner of this for a very long time. I think there were single-digit runners on the leadersboard on ZeldaSpeedruns.com for when I started. And so he had, a bunch of videos. He had a tutorial. I actually don't know when that tutorial came out. Maybe you can say that. But like,
I'd
we
have to
didn't
look at my
have.
VODs. I don't remember when I
Yeah,
did it.
it's pretty old. The
Yeah.
streaming quality hasn't improved, but the time has gone by, right?
Yeah, yeah. There's still some good strats, and there's still some good thing. I get.
Yeah.
I've been told this as recently as a few months ago, where that old video still has some good stuff in it. So
Yeah, and
I think it was like
that's
2014, 2015 is when I did it, something like that. That's a really old video.
I used it to learn how to play the game, and we didn't have Discord. Like we had the SDA forums that Breakdown and Feasel had mentioned earlier, and I used those too to look at strats. Or there was actually one huge Zelda 1 thread on SDA that went for years, I think. And
well, did I start a new one? I don't even remember if I started a new one or just posted the ones that had been there. Posting.
We should start a new one.
I posted I started doing bomb. I started keeping track of bomb drops. So I have no idea of coding and breaking down a game. So all I could do is just force it, trial and error. So I got a nice little percentage of bomb drop rates from the first Octorok. This was before screen scrolling. And so you get an idea of the likelihood of a bomb drop from, an enemy. And, that's just stuff that, because if you want to go back into it, Breakdown gets a ton of credit because he's the only one that really ran the game between 2008 and when I picked it up to, play it, try to, race them at a GDQ, because there was a lot of acrimony in the around that time, and we didn't have very many actual runs of the game, and they were all kind of, the three people that were mainly involved in it are kind of all their runs are suspect. So we don't have any sort of good legitimate runs that we could trust. So that was the also benefit of the SD forums, is that share everything. I did all this documentation of what I was doing, percentages, what worked, what didn't work, that kind of thing that didn't happen the 4 or 5 years prior when I was trying to do research on the game. But
that's kind of interesting, because you also mentioned brute forcing, and was a lot of your process is just trial and error, or did you have some ideas going into things? How do you find and discover some of that stuff?
Some of the task stuff was there. We knew the drop rates of enemies, or not drop rates, but what they dropped, and that they were in different subgroups, and different enemies drop different things, and we had that. And the tasks had screen scrolling, though they did it in a weird way, and they didn't know why it worked. They just knew how to recreate it. And then I did the dumbest thing in the world in January of 2012, is accidentally screen scroll while doing it was actually a double run, because I did that for SUDQ 2012. I did a double quest run, and accidentally screen scrolled, and had to. I got really upset that I had to figure out how to do it, and I didn't know how to, but I knew it was possible on console, and because I had just done it. And so spent a good couple months learning how to do that. And then, that kind of is a very strong staple of the game nowadays, is doing that trick.
It's almost second nature to the runs. It's one of those things, but we hadn't seen that until, until you did it. So.
Yeah.
I remember those early screen scroll streams of yours, figuring it out, and once you actually did have a pretty good grip on it, the different things you could do, and so that was a fun time in Zelda 1 speedrunning, certainly.
Oh yeah, well,
I like that.
Yes and no for me, because it's I never really liked it's not quite out of bounds stuff, but I never really liked it. But it's I didn't have a choice, because it's it's doable, so you got to do it, It doesn't.
I remember
change the game
asking
that
you.
much.
I actually remember asking you in your stream one time, it's like if you thought screen scrolling should be a separate category, and just the adamant no that came out of your mouth
Oh,
when
really?
I typed that in the chat. I remember that all too well.
I don't remember that. That's interesting.
Well,
Because I just think like you're not going out of bounds. It's just not. I didn't think it was worthy of a different category. It's its own.
I mean, it changed the game. It was a game
It does
changer.
change
It definitely
games, yeah.
was.
Well,
Yeah.
and when Andrew G was on the show, he mentioned, for better or for worse, at some point, Twin Galaxies is one of the leaderboards back at the time, and so they, very much no quote unquote glitches and things like that, and that you can
Yeah.
see how that influenced speedruns of these early 2010s.
Yeah, but again, they were a lot of the users in the Zelda community, they were kind of going back and forth between SDA forums and Twin Galaxies, but they were very secretive on the strats. So, and that was at the time a very guarded thing in Twin Galaxies, is guarding your strats, and that made it very difficult to research and how to learn how to do a run. So it's just like, do what you can, and but now we got to a point where SDA required a video, so it's not like you could hide your strats at that point.
Interesting, right?
So you got to do it.
Breakdown, you kind of touched on it a little bit, but I am curious, seeing what you did in 2010 and then seeing where Darkwing Duck and Lack are going to take the speedrun. Any thoughts on seeing the game be just broken into pieces over the next few years?
I mean, I watched it happen in real time, and I mean, if you watch the my earlier AGDQ runs, like the CGDQ run, ultra safe. The AGDQ 2011 run, still very safe but less safe. The race in 2012, fairly close to the actual current state of the game. We made a couple allowances for marathon safety, but we did level 3 first. We did the 3-4-1 route. Screen scrolling wasn't a thing yet at that point, but it's a case of the game was moving forward, and then basically these two, they both cited me, which warms my soul a little bit, but they both took that ball and they ran with it. They definitely did. This game went places. It's a much more interesting run than it used to be back in the day. Lots of amazing strats.
I mean, like I said, there was no one that ran the game between 2008 and when I picked it up in 2011. That's because you had done it in class, in the CGDQ. You did all three, right? Because you just mentioned it. I couldn't remember if you did it in 2011. I know you did it in 2012, but yeah, it's just like if there hadn't been that was a nice bridge from that old style of speedrunning into the new style we kind of do now. So I don't know if it would have been to that point. So there's no reason not to think of it that way, that you weren't a bridge.
So there is quite a history of the world record going back and forth from basically in those early 2010s all the way up to what we're seeing right now, a 2015 race and beyond. I guess maybe I'll throw this at the Lack first then. Is it something when you were grinding the game and trying to get better, is it an active competition for you? Are you watching what Darkwing Duck's doing and trying to say, I can do that better? Is it something you're self-motivated to do? The time period as a viewer, this is kind of when I really got heavy into watching speedruns, and it was just so enjoyable to see. It seemed like sometimes on a monthly basis, the world record going back and forth between you and Darkwing Duck. So I'm curious from your perspective, what was the drive to get better at the game?
Well, the time that you mentioned, that early 2015, was it 2016? I think it was 2016.
I think it's 2015.
16.
I thought.
Was it?
Is it 15?
I think it was 15.
For this run?
It was 20. You're right. It was 2015. It was 2015. At that point, it was a competition thing, because I knew I could be better than Darkwing at anything that I tried to do, No, but we really wanted to push the time below 30 minutes, or at least I did. And we were kind of just going back and forth. Like the first time I had set a record in Zelda 1 was in the summer of 2014. And then, this race was pretty hyped up because I hadn't met anybody yet. I had never been to an event before. And so, we were, or at least I was a little nervous because I'd never been to any of these events. I'd never seen anyone in person. Darkwing was kind of a staple of these events. He had been there at least a couple years. And so, when I showed up, I really wasn't sure what to expect. Am I going to you know, are we going to like be friends, or are we going to be enemies? You know, what's going to happen here? So, you know, it's kind of funny how far we've come in that regard. But like but yeah, like just having that competition early, like it was so intense too, like all the time. Like he's in Mountain Time and I'm in Eastern Time Zone. So that was a huge thing. Like every night I would go to bed and like in the morning, the first thing I would do would be check his VOD to see if he had beaten my time or his time. And it's just amazing, like the level of competition that we had. And I know that I'll let him answer for himself, but I was like all in. Like that's all I wanted to do. I just wanted to get better at that game, so that, you know, I could end up with all the glory.
Yeah.
Right? But,
well, I didn't want to lose because I had done that before.
Yeah.
Well, and just for let everybody know, at the time of this race, I did have the record, I believe, if I remember correctly.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
That I had taken it back. But yeah, I had a big, and I don't know if he's still muted or whatnot, but he's on break. But I had a pretty big competition with Feasel on Rygar, so I had done this before. So it's just like I didn't want to lose, and you know, I came out ahead in the Rygar battle, which we traded like, I think we both like five times each. I think we traded. Like when we both finished it down, I had like a 3 or 4 second lead, I think, something like that. So it was that was super fun. Like we'd be streaming it at the same time too. That would be the other thing we'd be doing. But that was, yeah. Yeah, I know. Yeah, and, you know, I have some people in my chat give you like some sort of trash talk little thing that I had going. I don't know, but yeah, that was something like, well, yeah, but something like that. But that was great. That was so Lack. See, here's the thing with Lack, and this is, I don't know if I had quite this. I didn't like losing it, and it's kind of not been great that I did lose it, but like at this time we were around 32, I think 32 or 31s at this point. I don't remember, but there had been more people starting to run the game, but no one had really gotten close to my time. And then, but watching Lack when he was getting 35s, like good 3 minutes or so, I was like, he was the one I was worried about. Definitely the one I was worried about that would beat my time, because a lot of his rooms were just cleaner. He just didn't have the experience on it, and I happened to be right. But that sucks. But you know, it worked out. You know, I'm 1 for 1 in those things. But you know, it's all good. We're, you know, I've learned to live with my failures, and Lack seemingly right in that he wanted to be better than me at everything, and he went out and did it.
Yeah.
Lack, I didn't find your speedrunning in your stream until you started running this game. Had you done any speedrunning before this? Because I got to say, all of this progress that happened in the game between you and Darkwing Duck all seemed to happen like in a firestorm that just it kept going. So I'm curious, had you done any speedrunning before this, leading up to it?
Yeah, I had, the first game I ever ran was Super Adventure Island 2 for the Super Nintendo. When I went to Speed Demo's archive, I looked for runs in games that I just like playing, and that one didn't have a run. So I said, oh man, and I couldn't find like a completed run. I said, wow, there's a free world record out there. I'm going to just go try to set it myself. So I just did a complete run. And then I realized later that you had to have all these crazy recordings of stuff to submit anything to SDA. Right. So I was like, well, I guess that run doesn't count, or I don't know. So I did that just a little bit, and I kind of messed actually with some Wind Waker tech, but I never really ran the game. I just kind of like learned how to do super swimming and some other stuff. So Zelda 1 was really early in my speedrunning career. And I've stuck with it since. Like, I've taken some breaks, but really has been kind of the main game that I've played ever since I started.
Wait. Your first
Duck,
run wasn't Big Nose the Caveman?
No, that was much later.
Okay.
So, Darkwing Duck, you mentioned the 35 at the time. What did you all think could be the possible best time around this time period, especially for like this race? Like, what did you think the Z1 was capable of at this time?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I imagine Lack would have better aspirations than I did. I think because I'd been running it for a lot longer. But I don't know if like we had a goal. We had the old TG time that was done with up A. Beating that without up A was like one of the first major goals, and that was 31:36. And that definitely was beat.
You had done that.
Yeah,
you had
I
done
think
that
so.
before I'd even come around. So.
Oh, is that what? Okay, so it wasn't 32s then that we were. I don't like the times started to get jumbled together because you have at the time there wasn't really any no up A runs at the time. There was on SDA the second quest run was a no up A and the first quest run was no up A. It was up A, sorry, and then that got removed, replaced as mentioned earlier by Vadava's time, which was what was his time?
Oh, I don't know.
I think it was in the 33s because I ended up submitting a 34. I think back in was it 2011, 2012, early 2012? I think is when I submitted a. No, I think it was 2011 where I submitted a 34. I think. No up A, and then came back to it. Started. I know 32:01 was a big time that I got. And then beating the Rodrigo time was the big thing. And then I kind of I had no real main aspirations after that. I know you definitely wanted to go south of 30 and much more than I was interested in it. I just was interested in being first, not in a time.
Yeah, I think that kind of came around later. Like I didn't really have a goal time until we got kind of close to 30 minutes. Like I think we saw the potential of the run. It's like, well, as we kept getting better and we definitely drove each other to get better at the game. I think is like, we would kind of steal strats from each other. We'd share some of it a little bit, but we would definitely kind of spur each other to be better at the game. And so we're finding, I remember when you clipped into the Patra 2 diamond for the first time in a run, and that blew my mind. Oh man, we didn't even think about that. And that was I think to get under 31 minutes, if I remember correctly. So as far as a final time to push for, I don't know if we ever even after we got under 30 minutes, I got 29:56 and I was like, that's it, calling it. I don't know. It can go lower. Like, somebody else can do it. Yada yada.
That's like 25th place now.
Yeah, that's it's pretty slow now. But after I played it a little bit more, we started seeing more potential time saves. And so that's when I was like, man, I wonder actually how low this could go. And so that's kind of when I really pushed it down, kind of like Darkwing had done for years. I just took it the next step, and was able to push it under 29 minutes. And now it's under 28 minutes, which is even crazier. That it's even gotten that far. If you had told us, back when we did this race, it's these races are actually kind of embarrassing times for us now, but the run would eventually be well, okay, you have a 31:02 or 31:08 or whatever. Just wait, it's going to be over 3 minutes faster within I guess 6 years or 5 years.
Something like that. Yeah.
I don't think we would have seen that. We knew the TAS was there. And TAS was 22:18, I believe, at this time. It had been around for a while. So we knew that was there, but we're like, they do crazy stuff. We're never going to get that low. So we always knew there was some potential, but really didn't know what was going to happen, RTA style.
It is definitely a bit mind-blowing, especially to watch it nowadays. The folks in the chat are noticing, if you haven't seen this one before, this is AGDQ 2015, and there are lead changes. This race has a little bit of everything. There's unexpected deaths. I mean, there's some...
Yeah, this was a great race.
Oh, it doesn't have unexpected deaths, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I've already
get into
gotten
that
my death
later.
out of the... I got my death out of the way early.
Yeah, I didn't.
Yeah.
So.
You died the wrong spot.
Yeah,
I do want to ask...
Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Darkwing Duck.
No, go ahead. Yeah, I think I know where you're
No,
going, which is where I was going. Yeah.
Well, I'll get to that in just a second. I do want to, you know, Lack, you mentioned this is your first time on the stage. And for those that aren't too familiar with history, Darkwing Duck had already performed this a few times, I think, at this point. You already had 3 or 4 runs, I think, in previous GDQs leading up to this. My question will be first to Lack. How do you prepare for something like this? What are the nerves like? You know, I mean, you mentioned a little bit of it, but could you tell us a little bit how you prepared for something like this, especially being how competitive the rivalry was?
Oh man, I was a wreck right before this. So they actually, we were supposed to go before Zelda 2 in this marathon, and then they switched it for some reason, like one of the runners couldn't be there or something.
One of the runners was, I believe, European and had flight issues, I believe. Got late.
Yeah. And so our run got pushed back like an hour. And so I was already I was ready to go mentally. And then, you know, we had to sit in the back. So if you watch the Zelda 2 run at this marathon, I'm in the back, and I actually had my controller with me, and I was just like pushing buttons on the controller to like, I don't know, just get some nerves out or something. So I was really nervous. Like I had played a lot to practice for this, but I'd never played games in front of people who were also really good at games. Like I was best on the block growing up. A lot of people probably were. But when you come to something like this, you know, you're probably not the best at anything really, or maybe one game. So, and someone like Darkwing, who, you know, had a ton of respect for, especially in these events and stuff like that. And like, it was just a lot of pressure too, because there was a lot of people that were really rooting for this race to happen. And when it got in, like, it was a huge deal. So, you know, there was a lot of like community pressure of just trying to do the best I could. So yeah, I'm much taller than Darkwing. So as long as I stood next to him, I felt pretty good. But when we're sitting there, you can see we're kind of even. So, but yeah, it was a lot of fun. But I was nervous the entire way through this race.
I do recall playing the heel a lot before the race, because like this was, okay, if it's AGDQ 15, I think I'd done a dozen GDQ runs to that point. So it wasn't like anything, I think, no, and it wasn't my first race either. So it was, and I hadn't lost a race yet, I think, up to that point. So I was pretty confident going into it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So,
yeah, you should have been.
And I had gotten the record back. Everything, I was like, I felt like it was
everything was going your way. But
yeah.
I mean, look, I'm about to die in level 6. So you could see like how nervous I was with movements and stuff. But
there is something I got to mention. It's kind of one of these weird, interesting moments of any live event that you attend. But I had watched your stream for a couple of years before I'd actually met you in person, Lack. And you know, you're over 6 feet tall, and so it's almost surprising because you're right. You're the same height right now as Darkwing Duck is up there on the webcam. So it's always kind of interesting and unique experience to get that in real life.
This middle image here of the camera is like one of my favorite GDQ images, just because of the number of like amazing people and runners that are back there. Like, yes. I mean, that is like an all-star, like Hall of Fame, except that person in the middle in the sunglasses. I don't know who that is. Do you know who that is? Like in the back?
Ray might, or Breakdown Alaska, maybe one of you, but
yeah, maybe they've been around longer. They may know. If anyone in the chat can figure out who that is, I would love to know someday.
Let us know. But actually, I want to ask about that. So, Breakdown, you know, you've been, first of all, you've witnessed quite a few amazing performances on the GDQ stage live and in person. But, you know, what was it like being watching this thing happen live?
Oh, it was a treat. It was definitely a treat. Let's see. I'm in that crowd behind the couch. I'm just off camera. I'm sitting next to Ted. But yeah, no, this was a joy to watch. It definitely was. Fantastic race. Actually,
it looks on the webcam. It looks so intimate. It looks like there might be like a dozen people there. I don't know how big the room actually was, but it doesn't look like just because we have
Well,
the webcam.
this was
I assume-
the
This is
stage
the
setup for
side
this one.
angle.
It was
Yeah.
basically like a third of the room. Yeah, basically like the TV setups didn't like face the whole room. They just faced this like
Yeah,
one
the
little area
side.
just back
Yeah.
behind the stage. And then there was the screens, and like if anyone who's been to a GDQ recently, there's the two screens with like the sea of people. Like that was off to the side there. Wasn't captured on the camera. There was like a crowd cam that would cut to between runs.
I believe on that one,
yeah.
the idea was that people were wanting that more intimate look again from like the 4-H Center and Essentias and all the SUDQ 2013 hotel, where there wasn't a ton. They wanted that feel. That was I think the idea behind that closeness, which hadn't had in the last couple GDQs. So, but
Yeah,
think
this
that's what that
race
was about.
pretty close right now, wouldn't you say?
yeah.
And because you're both there in person, how this is exactly how synced up it was on the stage. Could you see each other's screens as you're playing through?
Oh yeah. Yeah, it was just right. I mean, you can see it's just right there. We got the giant CRTs in front of us. So yeah.
Another question for you. One of the things that Zelda 1 is known for is some the drops and the count. And either one, would you mind just telling us a little bit about that and how you're able to keep track of that in a setting like this where you're thousands of people watching on a stream, hundreds of people in the room? How do you keep track of some of that stuff?
Well, for just
I mean, it's
drops and where
it's
you
hard,
don't know.
right?
Yeah, it's absolutely hard. But you have like, if you kill something and it drops a certain thing, you can know where you're at. If you kill two of the same enemies and they drop two things in a certain order, you kind of know where you're at. So you can at least have an idea and guess, and then do some extra stuff. This is pretty close. Oh, I don't want to. Why do I have this up? This brings back bad memories.
Yeah,
and this
you
is
blew
like,
the whistle outside.
Yeah, I know.
Remember
Like, because
that?
I see
Yeah.
in one of the outlines, you're asking what it's like to speedrun this game, Lat.
Yes.
And
Yes.
the answer to this, to me, is you have about 3 minutes of terror, about 20 some odd minutes of goofing off, and then another 5 minutes of terror. And that terror
Yeah, it's
always
very accurate.
And it's like it's completely. And yeah, ooh, good scrolls, me. And I haven't been able to get past that second terror ever in a GDQ run. Just never has happened, which is very.
Well,
There's always next year, man.
Unsettling. Yeah, it's something that it's a cross I have to bear, but
Well, it's totally understandable, Darkwing. And I think that's one of the things that makes this run so memorable for me personally is that there's this human element to all of this. There's the speedrunning, as much as you all make it look so easy up there, there's all these elements, and it's so interesting to hear it from your perspective because we just assume, hey, we've seen your world records. You can do this. This is no problem. This is easy. And it's really not. I mean, especially with all these eyeballs looking at you live and in person.
Well, at this
racing it. Yeah, racing it is so much more intense because you get one chance. Marathon, marathon setting as well. So like there's so much riding on that moment. Like if you don't perform at that moment, then, you won't do well. So especially with if it was a single rate, or like if you were doing this by yourself, it wouldn't be as bad. You kind of laugh at stuff. But here, we really want to win. Like there's so much riding on this personally and like in the community and, I hadn't really proven myself yet, so I was trying to do that. So there was a lot going on here.
Wow, I had to do a very quick one. Sorry, I shouldn't be watching this. I'm just I'm torturing myself watching this.
I love hearing this insight. But like you touched upon it, so we hadn't really talked about it, but were there more runners? Were there more people submitting runs at this point? Were new things outside of you two or outside of Darkwing Duck a lot being discovered? How has the game grown by this point?
Well,
Go ahead, Darkwing.
I'm just going to say, 6 months later, we had a swordless run, which was like one of the best runs we've seen for Zelda ever, I think. And it wasn't by either of us. Well, that one was Jay Coper, you see, right behind Lack there. So, I mean, it was certainly growing at this point. I don't know if this like made an explosion, but I don't. Oh, guys, this is the screen where it happened. Oh, I got through it. Oh, God, I'm so good.
No,
and then
it
terrible
was
at the same
later.
time.
It was later.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I would say that like this kind of started it because, with our like trading of the record and stuff like that, like people started paying attention to Zelda. Another thing that really contributed to Zelda 1 growing was the randomizer that was released, which was right around what was later this year. And so like more and more people started playing Zelda, just, either it was speedrunning or randomizer. And so like the community just started to grow. And so, later that year, I want to say like, got really involved and he's somebody that really contributed a lot. And then recently we've had so many more contributors, like, neither of us are the record holders. Like, I think I have 2 left maybe, but like, Shixel, Green Mario, RC Drone have all held the record recently in this category. And they've all contributed stuff too. So like the game really did kind of take off, after this, like maybe not right away, but definitely in the next year or so. It definitely started growing for sure.
Yeah,
randomizer.
Yeah.
I didn't realize like you only had a half a heart there at the end. It was,
yeah, I was about to die. Like it was really bad. Yeah.
Wow.
I was really nervous. Yeah, for sure.
I didn't realize you got bodied. Oh. All right.
I'm glad you pointed out all those other things too. I know it's a really fun race to watch. I'm glad we got a chance to watch it. But like, I'm glad you mentioned the other parts of it too, because as we talk about like the growth of speedrunning or the growth of Zelda 1, it's not just any one thing. It's this combination of a lot of things just all happening at once. And without a doubt for me, a part of that foundation was this back and forth between you two and seeing it come to a head here live and in person. Because also at this time, I don't remember how many, there weren't a ton of live events, if any others outside of GDQ. So getting a chance to actually seeing you both do this in person. You mentioned it too, Darkwing Duck, a lot of times it's just gameplay that you're watching on stream with sometimes somebody had their commentary and things like that. And so getting a chance to see the runners sweat in person, there's just something, I know it's terrifying it sounds terrible for both of you, but for the viewer, it was really quite, it was on the edge of your seat the whole time watching this thing. So for that sense. What was it at the end of this? I mean, I assume Lack and Darkwing Duck leading from this, did the nature of the relationship change? Did you still want to go back and forth beating each other? Like what would happen after this?
Well, after this is when the record swaps happened. The next 2 months was when we really pushed the time down. Like it went down about 40 more seconds in the next 3 months, which was crazy at the time because it really hadn't been going down at all. And then, there was that flurry of records. And so I think we switched 5 times.
Really?
Over the course. Well, I think like combined, we each set 5 new records, I believe. You could check the timeline if you want, but
I don't remember.
I have a better memory of it. I know you like to block it out.
Yes, exactly.
That's what I'm thinking here.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I mean the time just kept going down and I became motivated to take it as low as I could. So that's what I did.
Darkwing Duck, as we start to wrap this thing up, I guess I'll throw this one to you. Do you ever want to run the game again? Do you ever miss putting yourself through this or anything like that?
Maybe. I'm like, I'm well off the record now. It's and I don't know if I have the motivation to do the some of the new stuff that's being done now. So that's the best answer I've been giving everybody for. When did I last run this seriously? I got my PB on Beat the Record.
That was cool.
Yeah, which was interesting, but I haven't, and that was 3 years ago now, I think.
Yeah. And
I haven't really run it that seriously since because I burnt myself out on it pretty hard. But I don't know, we'll see. I can't, I'm almost getting to the age where it's hard to do any speed running, but it's it is what it is. We'll see.
Like, I know you've continued to pursue the game after this run, and I don't know, I can't remember when the last time you've run Zelda 1, but do you still see yourself playing anytime in the future?
Oh yeah, I honestly have the same answer as Darkwing. It's like maybe, like I want to, but I don't want to at the same time. Like, I achieved my goals in the game, which was to get sub 28, and so I did. And I haven't speedrun it since October of last year, so it's been a long time.
Oh wow! Yeah.
For me to be out of the game, which is the longest like I've gone without speedrunning the game. People ask for it all the time, but I'm enjoying. There's so many other games. To quote my friend Fast at CC, there's so many great games out there to speedrun, and it's like after this is my 9th year of speedrunning, 2021.
Wow.
And it's like, yeah, I mean, I'm the young one in the chat here.
Yes, you are.
So it's not even that big of a deal, but I've spent pretty much all of that speedrunning Zelda 1. So I was like, I want to do other stuff and then come back if I want to. Because like, I've honestly gotten the itch recently. It's like, oh, I could play it sometime. And then I say, no, put that down, put the game back. Stick with what you're doing. But it's been really cool to like see other people take the game and run with it. Darkwing was saying, like, I wanted to be number 1, like I wanted to be first. And I definitely had that for a long time. And yeah, I still want to be like first, but like setting all these records over the years, like we've both done it so many times. It's like, we've contributed so much to the game. There will always be somebody that will be better than you down the road. And you cannot just hold that off forever. Eventually, you'll just, your skills will deteriorate or other stuff will happen. People will get better. Somebody just might flat out be better than you, and they're going to be, ahead of you on the leaderboard. And eventually, you got to come to you have to kind of realize, like, hey, that's okay. Like, just because somebody else beat my time doesn't make my time any less meaningful. It's just not the current fastest time, but at that point it was the fastest time. So that's kind of what I've been holding on to. Some other people like Shixel, who I'm going to joke with, he's the current world record holder. He would say that's with sour grapes that I got beat. So,
well, I would agree with that because I had lots of sour grapes, I'll tell you.
Yeah, so I've got some grapes too, so we'll share it now. But it's been a great thing for, like, for me. I would never have met all these great people if it wasn't for Zelda 1. So I know that, like, this game has really kind of led me down a path that I probably wouldn't have gone down otherwise. So I'm extremely thankful for it. I'm extremely thankful for Breakdown and Jay Prophet, who I've not met, and Darkwing. For getting me into the game and getting, I wouldn't even be here today. So, like, all this cool stuff has happened because of that. So
big shout out to Jay Prophet. He was one of the tassers of the game. They released a new task out in like 20, right before your race Breakdown. That was 2012. He had he'd been working on it pretty hard with, who's like the main task. He did so many tasks. I can't remember his name right offhand. They collaborated. And and they came out with a new task right soon before, and like Jay Prophet was like in our streams, and he was acquainted outside of work to Sinister, who was a pretty prolific speedrunner, and so he had a good kind of rapport with the speedrunning community and task community, because that has sometimes in some worlds been a little bit acrimonious, but not always. But he was like really good with, strats and working on things. So a big shout out to him if he's ever around and would ever hear this.
Well, it's easy and honest to say here now in retrospect that the things that you all did during this time period leading up to this point and then beyond have inspired, it's just so obvious and easy to see. It's inspired a generation of yes, Zelda 1 runners and what you see on the leaderboard currently, but then also speedrunning in general. Zelda 1 was a game that a lot of us grew up with. And so seeing it played in this way and in this fashion at this level was. I've never run Z1, but I don't think I would have tried speedrunning had it not been seeing something like this back at that time. So I can, first of all, just thank all of you for doing what you did, but then secondly, giving us such a show. And I know there was a cost because of that. Some of us, speedrunning can be challenging, to keep at a certain level and grinding it out. So I don't take it for granted. I don't think the community does either, because it was such a wonderful moment in time to see all of this happening the way it did, and then to see this race and then the world records getting changed back and forth. So I can't thank you enough for joining us today, but then also for putting in the time and dedicating yourself so much to this, because, well, as you mentioned, Darkwing, we're not getting any younger, and this was definitely a time period that took quite a bit of time to commit to. So thank you so much for that. Breakdown is going to stick around. We've got more coming up, but before I go, Darkwing Duck and Lack, thank you so much for doing this. Darkwing, if I know you're still doing speedruns this day, so if people want to find you on the internet, where can they go see you do some speedrunning to this day?
Well, it's my Twitch channel is twitch.tv/Darkwing_Duck_SDA, and that's where my schedule's a little bit light nowadays, but I'm an evening streamer on my end, so it's late on the East Coast, but that's when my streams are. So yeah, that's where you'll find me.
Thank you so much.
And I am doing some speedruns right now, so on a game I've run in the past. So nice.
Awesome. Lack Attack, you stream pretty actively. Where can people find you and see you speedrunning and trying all sorts of different things?
Yeah, I speedrun at twitch.tv/LackAttack. I dropped the 24. This is weighing me down.
The 24 is gone.
Yeah, it is. I stream weeknights, weekends. I'm expecting, my wife and I are expecting child number 2 in August.
Congrats.
So, yeah, thank you. So, screen time may or may not get lower. We'll see. It might be at weird times. But, I like to stay active and speed run and do different challenges. Come hang out if you like.
I was tuned into your stream when you had Child in ARM on, child number 1 playing a game. I'm like, okay, there's nothing Lack can't do. You can pair it and play a game at the same time. I'm impressed. Yeah. Well, thank you both. For those of you that are watching at home right now on twitch.tv, don't go anywhere. Stick around. We're going to take a quick break. And when we return, Games Done Classic will take a look back at Zelda 2 and everything that goes along with that. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back right after this. And welcome back to Games Done Classic. My name is Lat Mackey. This is where we look back at legendary GDQ moments with the legends that made them happen. And we are talking all about Zelda 1 and Zelda 2. And right now, we are going to start with our Z2 discussion, The Adventure of Link, and the history of the speed run of the game, but also its appearances here at a GDQ. And I'd like to first welcome back Breakdown and Fiesel. Thanks so much for being here. Appreciate it, guys. And then also bringing in somebody you haven't seen on the panel yet, and this is Eon, current Zelda 2 speedrunner. And how do we describe it? Eon? Just, so much and play the game so well. Thank you so much for being here and chatting all about Zelda 2. Really do appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. I love this game.
It's really important, I think, too, to have, as we're going to learn, Eon is still actively running the game, and I think that's going to help bring a really interesting and good perspective to what we're going to see here today. I'm actually just going to, this run that you're seeing on screen, this is from AGDQ 2013, but I'd first like to take us back a little bit. We talked about it early on in the show. Breakdown, tell us a little bit, what was the community like? How long had you been speedrunning the game when we first saw it in 2010? Set the stage a little bit, historically speaking, as far as Zelda 2 goes.
The community, not that dissimilar to Zelda 1. There were a few more active runners for Zelda 2 back when I got into the game. This would have been back in 2006. It was the very first game I decided to set down a speedrun, and I kind of did it independently and then found out that there were other people who did this too. So there was basically a little bit of scatter between Speed Demo's archive and Twin Galaxies.
Okay. So that was still a thing.
Yeah, Twin Galaxies was definitely still a thing. There was, I don't know, you could call it a rivalry, I guess, between the sites. Definitely people had, like, their home base on the internet, and they would defend it to the death. But let's see, the Twin Galaxies folks were mostly more guarded with their strats, and, well, they didn't actually have to do video verification. And let's see, the word acrimonious popped up a few times in the Zelda 1 section. That happened to Zelda 2 as well. On the SDA side of things, there were a few active runners. Let's see, there was, Tommy Montgomery had the no up a no death abuse record. Recently set. He did have one death in the lead up to the Final Palace, but it was deemed not to help him, so they let it through as a no death abuse thing. And that was a category that I thought was neat, so that was the one that I played. I got my very first deathless run through the game was the one I submitted. It was like a 117, and that was the time on the site for a good 4 years, something like that. There were a few other categories, like I believe Empty Eye had the New Game Plus record at the time. I forget the time on it. And then there was an up A death abuse run by, I think, TSA, though that brings us back into the acrimonious realm of things. But not really like an active, like thriving community for the game at that point in time by any stretch of the imagination. Basically, I set my time and then didn't really pick up the game until the lead up to CGDQ. It was one of my favorites. It was probably my single favorite Zelda game at the time I decided to run it. But it didn't really feel much need to push it further once I got the time. It's just like, okay, I did it. I'm done. And yeah, that's basically how that went at that time. Then some other runners came into the scene. Arctic Eagle, let's see, was the first one to really start incorporating like Candleless Death Mountain for the hammer and things like that. And that brings us into like the early 2010s, like late aughts, early 2010s. And then, well, we get to people who are active in the call starting to emerge. And yeah, that was kind of the early state of things for Zelda 2 speedrunning.
Thank you for the perfect segue there. Fiesel, when did you pick up the game? We talked a little bit about it in the first segment, and what led you to start grinding the way you did with this game? Because you're one of the first, or you're one of the earliest runners I remember being able to watch your grind live and on I don't know if it was Twitch originally, but back at that time period.
Yeah, there wasn't really, to my knowledge, anyone streaming Zelda 2 at that time. So really, it just started with me really just kind of picking it up for fun, because I was very inspired by what I was seeing on SDA, the runs from the runs that Breakdown mentioned, and Arctic Eagle in particular really brought some new stuff that no one had really thought of to the table. It was very inspiring, and then that Dark Death Mountain was key. Like that, I thought was the most impressive thing. Very hard section of the game to do that right at the very outset with, very little going on and no candle. I thought that was really impressive, and I wanted to learn that. And so my running of the game kind of expanded from there. I started out just kind of learning that part, and then, started racing people, and then I, started working on just trying to get, see if I could take a record in the game, because there were already a couple different categories evolving at the time. I mean, most people were pretty focused on any percent deathless or any percent no death abuse at that time. That was really thought to be sort of the main category of the game, the best category of the game, because which is actually kind of odd, because I actually kind of like the version with up A and with intentional deaths and game overs and things. I think there's actually more strategy to that, but there's a lot of strategy when you're not allowed to take a death and not allowed to use an up A or anything. Your experience routing makes a bigger difference, and the experience routing really is kind of like the best thing about writing that game. The most interesting thing is routing your experience, and it was such a more complex problem when you do the game deathless. So that's what we were all really interested in at the time, and I think the first 2 times I ran it, you're seeing the second time I ran it SGDQ 2012. We actually did no candle is the category officially. That was a donation incentive. If the goal was met, I run it without the candle, which it was, and I did. And then this is the second time I ran it, this just about 6 months later, HDQ 2013. So I was probably a little more comfortable with it in this one. But yeah, that was really the category everyone was very interested in. And then other categories started to come up. People got interested in the 100% and the all keys and the any percent with up A. And then eventually the glitch, once we found the healer glitch, a couple of us really just started working on it to see if we could, how fast we could beat it, with all the glitches.
I'm not quite sure who to throw this question to, so I will ask it just to the panel. If you look at the leaderboards nowadays, just kind of comparing Z1 and Z2, Z1 has quite a few more submissions than Z2. Z2 can be a bit, for some reason, it's still a bit controversial as far as a Zelda game and the difference it has between some of the other games in the series, and we can get to that in a second. But is that still the case at this time? I mean, was the breakdown? You kind of set the stage a little bit as the popularity starts to grow a little bit. Did Z2 and Z1 did they kind of stay the same, or was it dwarfed by one or the other? That kind of thing.
I'd say once Zelda 1 started picking up steam, it definitely overtook Zelda 2 in terms of speed running popularity.
Yeah.
That's kind of just not really debatable. It's just basically a fact. Zelda 2, it's very much its own game. It's different than the other entries, like the 2D entries in the series, because you have the side-scrolling 2D combat and the experience routing, the live system. It's very much a different game, and it attracts a different kind of player. Like, just because you're a fan of Zelda games doesn't necessarily mean you're a fan of this game. So it just draws a different player pool.
Yeah, back then this was like the bad Zelda game. Like it was kind of I mean, that's sort of the reason why I picked it up, is because I was running like Deadly Towers and like some games of real questionable quality. But I'm like, I love this. This was my favorite, one of my favorite games as a kid. And I'm like, man, why everyone really hating on this game? Everyone, how did that happen? I'm definitely going to have to run it. I think that made me want to run it more. The fact that it was just this bizarre, weird Zelda with no resemblance to the other members of the series.
I think that's actually kind of what got me into speedrunning this game, and just being as loud a proponent for it as I was at the time, is like with the rise of the internet and message boards and things like that, people dumping on this game. I'm like, no, I love this game. It was one of my very first NES games. I have deep-seated nostalgia for this game, and it's just like, no, this is my favorite Zelda, and I'm going to shout it from the rooftops. And of course, when it came time to pick my first speedrunning game, it's like, yeah, Zelda 2, because it's the best. The best. Come at me.
Period.
So.
There's going to be a bit of bias here, because even though I don't speedrun Z2, it's one of my favorite games of all time. And I love the way that you've all described it. I'm going to ask this question of Eon as well. What makes the speedrun of Z2 so interesting and kind of so great from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, the combat in the game is just so fun. It's real satisfying to do it well, and just the way that the physics of the game works out, the movement on the side-scrolling sections is just very satisfying, and the way that you can, do things like if you stab the wall with your sword, it repositions you, so you can use that to take advantage of different things, or if you have beams, you can jump and shoot a beam behind you and then keep going forward without losing momentum. Stuff like that makes for really cool combat tech. So
yeah, it controls so well. The game, it feels so good controlling the character. They really just knocked it out of the park with play control. Yeah, and just like Ian says, they added, the physics are perfect. There's just the right amount of momentum that you can be attacking backwards without losing your speed, having high and low attacks. There's shields that you can bounce off of, and some enemies have shields or hard parts that you can bounce off of in certain ways. And the way you bounce depends on exactly the angle you approach the thing at. So there's just a lot of nuance you can get with some little minor adjustments to your timing. So yeah, the physics really is what nails it, I think, above anything else.
That's a really good point. And one of the things we didn't actually get into too much in the Z1 conversation was the difficulty ramp, and how that game, especially if you're playing it from a casual perspective, the difficulty really ramps up towards the last 2 or 3 dungeons. In this game, it seems like you kind of get it right away. casual or as the speedrun, it seems to play as a really challenging game, and I don't know if that was off-putting at the time for certain people as well. I know it can be, especially NES hard. This game could definitely is one of those games that comes to mind when you think about the NES challenge of games back in the 8-bit era. Does the speedrun, and this I guess to Fiesel, actually to the whole panel, does the speedrun have some of those same sort of difficulty spikes? Is it right all at you at once? I mean, what's the challenge as far as the speedrun goes?
Dodging those stupid overworld enemies.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's sort of different when you're a new speedrunner versus an experienced speedrunner. So, as an experienced runner, there's not really any part that's all that super challenging anymore. But when people are learning the game, particularly the 100% all keys category is what people usually start with. Death Mountain is the first real big difficulty spike in that. And then Great Palace, obviously, and Valley of Death are two other difficulty spikes for when you're learning it. And then if you're learning a category that does Dark Death Mountain, that's a huge difficulty spike as well. So
we talked about.
Yeah, I think.
Go ahead, Fiesel. Go ahead. No, you're good. Please.
I think survivability is the tough thing for a lot of people starting out. And so, yeah, as Ian said, a good accessible entry into it is the 100% all keys, because you're doing all the dungeons, you're doing it in a pretty typical order, so you're not really going, out of the difficulty curve, and you have a lot of hearts and experience to work with. So that's kind of like survivability. Once you get past that, I think the thing that really is challenging is when you're watching your time, and you're really starting to bring your time down. Then you start to run into this wall of am I manipulating the overworld enemies right? Am I, all these little things that you're doing, little things add up all over the place, even in just the way that you attack enemies. You can find if you do something wrong, you'll be losing little bits of time all over the place. But yeah, you kind of hit a different plateau once you really become serious about your times. You'll hit a different plateau where you feel like you're getting better, but your times just don't improve because you will lose huge chunks of it to an extra encounter here or there. Things like that.
I'm curious about some of the evolution of the speedrun itself too. We got a chance a little bit to talk about routing and some of those things. Fiesel, at this time, and breakdown as well. Were there new routes being discovered? How would you kind of, develop a game plan around this game? Because so much can change, it seems like, in game with experience and all those kind of things.
Yeah, routing the experience is kind of the biggest thing for you, because you make so much experience by playing the palaces right, by ending the palaces at the right spot, in order to get up to a decent levels to be able to do the Great Palace efficiently. Everything has to go right at each of your palaces, and your drops have to be in the right place. And there's so many different ways of doing it. I don't know, I would just spend days and days just poring over spreadsheets. I would just mark down all the enemies on the way, how much, what group do they count as, how much are they worth, what targets do I need to hit. But that's kind of the biggest thing that really constrains it, is how you're going to do your leveling. But the other thing that I found really started to make a difference, especially maybe in the later years of it, when I was kind of moving into my Zelda 2 retirement, people got a lot better at manipulating overworld encounters, and I think that part of the routing ended up really starting to take off. I did the up A, any percent up A run, and the nice thing about that, I started working on it. The nice thing about that is the overworld RNG resets every time you up A, or returns to a known state. So you actually have the ability to plan out what you're going to do in the overworld as well, assuming you can play very consistently. And I was inspired a lot by Arctic Eagle. Arctic Eagle figured a lot of this stuff out. And it was there in his videos, and people just didn't even realize what he was doing and why did it turn out so well for him until I and other people really started to look at it and be like, oh, this thing that I thought that I figured out myself, Arctic Eagle was already doing that. So, that was a kind of a big thing, but that's taken off, and people really can manipulate so much now. It's amazing. And Ian could probably talk more about that, because she worked on the game a bit later than I did on average.
And just to chime in real quick, it's
Go for it.
watching newer runners, dodge enemy encounters is something that just blows my mind. It really does. It's just like, oh my goodness, like how? Like actually going back to like my original runs of this game, like, you know, I was actually planning on random encounters a little bit for parts of my experience route, and it's just like, okay, I'm gonna grab like 50 from random encounters on this walk, and that's gonna get me where I need to be. And well, that's bad. That's slow. So, but gonna let Eon go now and talk more about the routine of how we
how's
got
that
here.
evolved? Yeah.
Yeah, so no, there's a neat discovery like about 2 years ago where with specifically the overworld random encounters, they actually exist in two different states, one where they sort of random walk around and one where they home in on Link. And we can kind of manipulate which state they're going to spawn in based on the amount of time you spend on the last screen before exiting to the overworld. And so if you watch like modern runs, you'll see runners like doing sword stabs before they exit a screen or reading a sign before they leave town. And all that is to just wait a known amount of time so that the encounters move and behave in the way that we want them to, so that we can either avoid taking an encounter or take an encounter over a fixed overworld encounter space. So
it's kind of cool. I mean, that's kind of wild that that's what it's evolved to. You know, one of the things you all mentioned early on is sharing ideas and things over SDA. But Fiesel, you mentioned that, you know, people didn't know what others were doing at times, and so not everyone was participating. It sounds like in the small amount of leaderboard or places, or message boards, the places that had to communicate in the first place. So you still,
yeah. I mean, the thing about using like pre-streaming, the thing about using SDA to collaborate was, you know, not a lot of people had the ability to just like upload their works in progress to YouTube or to wherever. So there was a long turnaround on things. So you would pack a lot of new things into a run, and you would grind it out to get the time that you wanted. You put this video up, it would take a couple of months to process and post, and then everyone would just be like kind of just be this deluge of new information as everyone digested this new run that came out. And then you as the runner, sometimes people will point out something really dumb like, oh, hey, why didn't you just do that? You could have saved 5 seconds. And you're like, oh man, why didn't you tell me this 6 months ago? But you know, the feedback cycle has gotten a lot quicker now that everybody who's doing world record attempt streams. It's like, if you're doing something wrong, everyone will tell you. So that actually helps.
Yeah, being
gotta
able to
like the internet.
being able to see the improvements in real time is definitely like a huge change from how things were done, like, you know, 10, 15 years ago. It's basically like any like work in progress speedrun basically came down to how talkative the person who was doing it wanted to be on the forums. Like, I can tell you right now, basically anytime I was working on a run, basically I would do a session and then basically post a blog on SDA is basically what I do. I'd throw up a wall of text in whatever game thread it was. Not everybody did that. It's just every once in a while it's just like, oh, I didn't even know this was in the works, and all of a sudden it's on the front page and it's like, oh wow, look at that. And then maybe they post it, yeah, hi, thanks, I did this, look, I hope you enjoyed it. And that would be like the extent of what you would see about it on the forums. And you'd also run into instances where people didn't really understand what exactly they were doing, but they knew it worked, like they didn't know why, and so they wouldn't, like, you were basically at the mercy of their ability to explain it until you could actually see the final product. So definitely the flow of information was slower back in the day.
On the very first episode of this show, Freddie Anderson, he was in Sweden, and he was talking about having to mail his VHS tapes across the pond to Texas or to wherever SDA was located at the time. And so, not to mention, you know, the flow of information, obviously, just not quite what it is today, where we can see things nearly instantly, and it's really impressive and kind of great to see where it's come, because we can share these strats and people can start to learn things at a lot quicker rate than they used to be able to. Fiesel, what was the most popular category at this time? What is the run that in Z2 that people are running the most?
Well, at first it was just any % deathless, just because everyone thought that was kind of like the flagship category. That's, you know, that's the main one. But as soon as anyone really started to put effort into 100% all keys, that really took over. It ends up just being a real fun race, very accessible to new players. You know, that's really the main category now.
Yeah, Ian, I'm gonna actually throw that question over to you. Why has that category become the one that's really resonated, at least with the most amount of runners trying it out for the first time?
Yeah, I think a big part of that has to do with, you know, doing a deathless run of Zelda 2 is really difficult. I think a lot of people are, even with the all keys category, people are still intimidated by this run because that has the 1 credit clear requirement as well. And so sometimes we try to push people to, and I've really tried to push people when they're learning to do the 100% no major glitches category, which you can route it like all keys if you want, but you can also take game overs or up A's and stuff. And so you could take advantage of those scripted walks that Fiesel was talking about earlier when you up A and get that RNG back to a known state. So it's really just more approachable to be able to take some deaths, intentional or otherwise, and also getting the candle. That's a thing that really intimidates people is if they're gonna skip the candle. Not a lot of people actually want to do that. So you see the number of times on the leaderboard drop off sharply when it's a category that's routed without the candle. So
Fiesel, I was going to ask you about that. I'm sorry, Breakdown, were you going to say something? I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, full disclosure to date, I have never done Death Mountain without the candle. Never bothered to learn it.
It's intimidating. I agree with you. I'm totally right there with you. Fiesel,
It's the same as in the light. It's just the same thing.
yeah, it's really not that bad. Honestly, Jump Cave in the dark is harder than Death Mountain in the dark.
Yes.
what is that exactly? Would you mind describing that a little bit?
Sure. So the big thing is the Gorilla enemy under the low ceiling. The way that they throw the boomerangs, it's a random pattern, and you can't always get a good read on where they're going to throw the next boomerang. And you're also in there with attack 1 and life 1. So they hit hard, and it's really easy to take a quick death in Jump Cave.
Going through this run we've been watching for a little while now, you still don't have the candle yet. There's still quite a few places that are not lit up. When you're in a live setting like this, Fiesel, are you able to see what you can see at home on your own setup and things like that? Can you see things moving on the ground and stuff like that?
Yeah, so what's actually happening, the way you're able to see is the sprites are replaced with a black palette, so all the colors are turned black. And there are some places where the sprite overlaps with the ground a little bit, like the hitbox where you walk on the ground doesn't exactly match the visual edge of the ground. So you see this tiny little like flicker of a few black pixels at the foot of a dark enemy. And that is as long as the TV, that you're sitting close enough to the TV to see that, and as long as it doesn't have weird like color and contrast settings or something like that, it's not so bad. That's really the only cue you use. But after a while, I mean, you barely even use that, just because there's only certain. I mean, the enemies aren't random. The enemies are going to be in the same places every time. I mean, sure, you don't know which way the bats went when they swooped, but there's still, even those things, a couple of different possibilities. And so eventually you know exactly what's where, and you don't really need to see it. And you know what it's doing because the enemies attack at a certain rate that you can predict. And so, like, it looks really like, like this white knuckle thing, but like really once you've done it enough times, it isn't any different. Like, I don't realize that I'm fighting in the dark any more than I would realize I'm fighting in the light in a palace or something like that. You don't think about it.
Breakdown, I got a question for you. As you've seen some of these things start to evolve and some of these new strats, is there a strat or a route or something that happened in the game where you thought just completely changed the game, or never could have imagined seeing the game move in that direction, starting from way back when to where it is now?
Let's see. Well, people actually like going for Death Mountain in the dark. Like, that was definitely like the big like change for the category that I played. In terms of like more recent strats, like I'm not sure if I'd call it like, a game changer for the route, but just something that blows my mind every time I see it is the eco boost in Palace 5. Like, that just always impresses the heck out of me every time I see it. I would have loved to have known about that back in the day, and it looks so smooth. And it's basically just boosting off one of the bubble enemies to skip a use of fairy at the start of Palace 5, and it's just like, that's so smooth. It's every single time I see it, I'm just like, yes, that's awesome. So
yeah, that's the coolest trick. Like, it doesn't even look possible. But it's once people do it consistently, the way people jackhammer too, like some of the fights where people use jackhammer technique, I would never have thought that it was possible to do it.
Oh yeah, some of those like blue iron knuckles, like leading up to like the
double hits.
Yeah, just straight drill through them. it's that's
Right.
really
Or like the
impressive.
Palace 5 boss, you just go like careening into his hitbox and just and the boss dies. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
The people who do that well.
That was a boss I always treated with fear and respect, so it's nice to see him just get wrecked every once in a while. The Barba strat too. Barba drill strat's a good one.
Oh yeah.
It's fun to watch people who, even on casual playthroughs, who don't know anything about the game, because they won't even think to try the jackhammering on certain enemies and this and that, and it's really become kind of a cornerstone now of some of some of the things you do in the game. Yeah, and I heard you mention, I found your stream very early on when I got into Zelda 2 and things like that. And you mentioned if you were considering trying out this speedrun on your own, about learn how to play the game and the mechanics and how Link reacts to certain things and stuff like first. And it seems like that's a really great way to, take on some of the early hurdles of this game. Why is that important? And what are some of those mechanics that are important to learn early on in the speedrun?
So combat is huge. Like Fiesel mentioned before about survivability being the big hurdle to completing speedruns, and the biggest factor in your survivability is avoiding damage, and you do that best by killing enemies quickly. And the shorter they're alive, the less chance they have to hurt you. And so learning the combat and realizing how basically every enemy you kind of need to approach in a slightly different way. And I think that's a thing where people get frustrated with the game, is you can't attack, the Dairas the same way that you attack the Iron Knuckles, the same way that you attack the Stalfos and stuff like that. So really taking the time to try out different combat strats against different enemies and seeing what works and what doesn't. That's really the biggest thing, I would say.
Yeah, being able to read the enemies is really important, because like Ian says, every enemy behaves completely different. You approach it completely differently, and they're not stupid enemies. Like, all the enemies in the game are, like, for what they do, are pretty smart, and they all have their own little thing going on. And just, you got to recognize that some of the enemies will whether the enemy backs up or moves forward depends on what you do. Just knowing like the rate at which they're going to attack, paying attention to whether their guard is high and low on the enemies that have shields and things like that, and learning what are the squishy parts and what are the hard parts of the enemies, because the hitboxes are a little different, and the way that you approach them is a little different. But knowing exactly where to hit them, and you'll bounce off different enemies different ways. So really, just spend a lot of time with very careful combat, just like paying attention to what's happening and reading how the enemy responds. And then learn that in the air you can attack crouching or not crouching, and those are completely different and have completely different uses. So little things like that make a big difference.
Yeah.
Fiesel, as we're watching your run, one of the things that is abundantly obvious is that you do have really good control over Link, and it's one of the things that struck me right away. And I'm wondering, did you have access to save states and to modern tools that we use nowadays to learn how to play this game? Like, how did you learn and put in the time to get this good at the game?
Oh yeah, save states. I mean, as early, I started speedrunning in 2007, and even then I was doing my practicing on emulator, and I was save stating constantly, and I would just make myself a directory of just 50 different locations that were tough, and every day when I would practice, I would just load up each save state and I would grind it until I got that trick 10 times, and I moved to the next one. It was all very short loop practice. That's how I really did most of my learning. I found that to be the most effective thing. So yeah, I would short loop practice all the different parts of the run, and anything that I failed at, I would make a note to do more of that the next day. And it was only after a lot of practice did I ever actually try stringing it together and doing runs. So by the time anyone saw me streaming anything, or by the time anyone saw a video of mine, you're kind of missing all the
the trial and
preparation work that went into it.
Right. I think this is kind of an interesting time period too, because if you watch Zelda 2 speedrunning today, there are many wonderful categories that didn't exist back then, and then also the runs itself. We have new strats, we have new things. Ian, can you perhaps touch upon some of the things that for this category that have changed or that have evolved since Fiesel did this way back in 2013?
So, yeah, so I haven't noticed any up A's. Was this just any percent basically deathless, or what was?
This is deathless. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
That's right.
So I honestly don't know that a lot has really substantially changed about this one beyond minor things like, well, actually, eco key isn't necessary because you don't need that key. But the overworld manipulations that we've got now is the big thing. Yeah. Beyond that, I don't really know a ton. Like,
cool.
I mean, I know. Going through, I don't know if you get the spell and use that in Dark Valley of Death, but the top runs these days will use beam strats in there and just not get the spell at all, which is real scary to do Valley of Death in the dark without the spell. Because
I don't remember if I actually got spell. I might have done it just for marathon safety, but I wasn't supposed to. I mean, it's not a thing that you were supposed to get then.
Sure. Yeah. So I mean, if that was going on at this time, that's not a new development either. So, this
cool.
This category is like the route has been pretty optimized for a while, I think.
Yeah, the categories that allow glitches really are the things that have kind of blown up, because this, like, not long after this, or maybe it was around this time, where people started doing the, using the wrong warps and things like that. And that, you don't use any of that in this run, but there were other categories where people started to use all kinds of different, the fairy feet and things, like all kinds of different glitches that no one was using before. So that's kind of where it started to develop after this.
I actually wanted to ask about that. And, Fiesel, at this point had the scroll lock, had all that kind of stuff been discovered, or is that about to be discovered? Where is that in the history of Zelda 2 speedrunning?
It's around, we're looking at early 2013 right now. It's around then. There was a forum post, I forget, there was a couple of people who were involved in this. There's a forum post by someone who is a runner of the game, and then someone else who were talking about it. And everyone is saying, oh, this is something that could be done. I actually did a run of it on stream. I think it was the first time that I know of that anyone had actually completed the game. It was like 30 minutes or something like that.
Yeah.
Using that. And then that was the last time I ever did it, because I didn't like trying to get the dumb healer glitch over and over again.
I know.
But after that, people started to find all kinds of different things that you could do, and the glitch categories just started to get real good.
Yeah, I know you did a run also with doing an any percent glitched without the healer glitch, where you used the HUD ferry in Darunia to get to Glitch Town.
Oh yeah, that's right, off that roof there. Yep.
Yeah, which getting to Glitch Town that way was actually in a old Nintendo Power magazine.
Wow, yeah, I didn't know. I missed that. Yeah.
I would like to touch upon that because, we have these categories with those things. Ian, could you give us a little maybe a historical perspective? How did those type of things change the game? Like, what did the healer glitch do? How did that,
Sure.
What did that do to the game?
So healer glitch does a couple things. It lets you, right away, it lets you wrong warp from the nearest town to start to King's Tomb, which lets you get into the back door of Death Mountain. And so you can get the hammer in like 3 minutes, which is versus like if you go the route that Fiesel went here, I didn't see the time on this, but I know people can get it in about 9 minutes, the hammer without the healer glitch. So that saves a good chunk of time, but then you can also do a stack overflow memory corruption to set up a state that we call scroll lock. And what that does is the game's only supposed to allow you to enter up to 2 doors at a time before you have to exit a door to go out. And so it uses a data structure called a stack for that. But if you get to Glitch Town, all the doors point back to Glitch Town. So then you can enter more than 2 doors, and then it starts writing to areas in memory that it's not supposed to be able to. And one of the things that does is it writes over some memory that the game uses to know how wide screens are, and then that has the impact of, in a lot of cases, preventing the screen from scrolling to the left, which lets you exit on the left side of the screen with the screen scrolled to positions where you shouldn't be able to exit to the left. And then that lets you effectively exit out either the down exit or the up exit on a screen. And that has the impact of, in caves, it does like entrance index math to point you to the exit when you exit from there. and so that's how you can wrong warp from Spectacle Rock over to Maze Island. And when you're in palaces, you can go around all sorts of different ways without needing to unlock doors, and without like you can also like wrong warp between palaces from that. So it really just the any percent route is it's a very short run that it's 17 and a half minutes now, and gets the bare minimum. But then if you look at something like the 100% glitched or the reverse boss order, where they're much longer glitched categories, and you see a different example of how that scroll lock is applied, because depending which doors you enter in, you can have different effects on things. And then you get to see, wrong warping in between palaces to save time for different things, and all kinds of really cool stuff. So.
Breakdown, I'm going to kind of bring this back to you once again. When you first started running the game or putting this game out there, did you imagine that things like this, there was a potential to have see these kind of discoveries happen for this game?
I had no idea this game was nearly as broken as it could be, certainly. So, no. It's in terms of, like, the glitched any percent, like, I was just as surprised as anybody when those strats came to light. It led to some really cool categories, though. And it's like, we got Eon on the call here. That RBO run a couple of GDQs
so
ago
cool.
was a treat. That was a treat.
Thanks.
That was a fun one to watch. And yeah, no, that just something like that being possible. Like, the game doesn't want you to go into the Great Palace first. It doesn't want you to do that. So yeah, Thunderbird first is the fact that can be done is not something I ever would have thought possible. But it was cool to see.
Yeah, and it's like, I would say it's actually a testament to how well the game is programmed, the fact that we can break it apart as badly as we can and it doesn't crash.
Right. That's what still blows my mind about it, that, there's supposed to be these barriers for you to be able to go from one palace to the other, and the game says, hey, you know what? It's going to keep going. That's so wild to me. Just to kind of get a feel for this, nowadays when we watch a run on GDQ, it's been practiced, and a lot of times there are commentators who, because these communities have grown, we have people who can commentate on the run. If the runner wants to participate, or if they want to focus on the game, they can kind of choose to go that route if they want to. Fiesel, tell us a little bit about like preparing or showing this game off. Like the previous GDQ and then this one in 2013. Had you put any thought into the preparation of it? Because you were that I can remember, one of those earlier speedrunners who was streaming live. So did you put any thought or any work into that side of things?
Like, as far as improving my commentary game rather than just focusing on not dying?
Yeah, were you able to find people who could speak about the game while you're running and things like that too?
Yeah, so by this time, 2013, that was after I started streaming and having a microphone. Like, it was a lot harder for me the first like 2 GDQs that I was in, because I really wasn't a streamer then, and it was like, I found that once I started doing it on a regular basis, that kind of got easier, and I didn't really have to think about it. I generally didn't prepare commentary. It was just kind of on the spot, and I was relying on the couch commentators, and it looks like I've got some good ones there. Yeah, no, I never really thought much about the commentary aspect of it. It just came a little bit more naturally. Just the more you stream, it gets easier.
Many of us who played this game specifically as a kid know how challenging it can be. And so there's something, and maybe all of you could speak on this, I don't know, but being there live watching a Zelda 2 run, but also watching it on the stream, it always seems like at any moment you could just die. It's one of those runs that keeps me on the edge of it could be because I love the game, obviously. That could obviously be a big part of it. But do you feel that kind of same sort of suspense, or do you feel like you're on the edge of the seat when you're doing this, Fiesel? Or at this point, have you gotten comfortable enough the game where you were pretty confident with what you could do?
Oh no, anytime there's a room with a bot and lava, anything can happen.
Bots are jerks. Confirmed.
No, and
in case people don't play this, they're very random. Like those little low tier enemies, the little tiny slimes, the little blue and red slimes and stuff, are the most obnoxious enemy in the whole game. Because all the more sophisticated enemies, they have a little bit of AI going on. They're trying to do a certain thing. The bots, they'll just like sit there quivering, and you think, okay, he's going to do nothing this time. And you approach, and it just like jumps at you out of nowhere and knocks you in. So that's by far the most vicious enemy, and that can happen anytime, and it does not matter how good you are. You can die at any point.
One thing I should point out about the route here, I do notice something that diverges from the modern route on this category is Fiesel did boots first and then left Palace 4 to go get the reflect spell. Typically now, Palace 4 is done in one shot, so the runners would get the reflect spell before getting the boots. So,
speaking of that, Ian, as we move into the more modern era of speedrunning of Zelda 2, what are some of the things that, differentiate a, dude's world record run compared to what we're, is it skill? Is there RNG? How does one, crack that top 10 of, upper echelon of runners?
sure. So first thing is no one is as practiced as Dude is. He puts more time into this game than anyone, I think. But no, the other thing is the Overworld. He spent so much time on learning to read and react to the Overworld spawns, and the Overworld enemies spawn on a step count as well as a frame count, and so it's important to develop sort of an internal sense for when those two things are going to trigger, and so then you know when to stop to be able to read and react to what they're doing, and so avoiding taking those Overworld encounters is huge because they take 7 seconds for one of them. You take 10 Overworld encounters, that's a minute. So there's that. There's also anytime you take damage, that's at least 1.5 seconds time loss. So not taking damage and then just efficient combat on the enemies and the bosses that you do kill. So
it's come quite a long way. And Fiesel, when you stopped running the game, life takes over, of course. I'm curious if you could have foreseen or did you guess that the game could be broken or figured out the way that it has been when you stopped running the game?
I mean, by the time I started kind of phasing Zelda 2 out of my repertoire, Simple Dude and Pro JN were already total rock stars of the Zelda 2 scene. And I think at that point, I was just kind of went numb to being impressed with how much the things can improve. Because literally every week, it would just be JN or Dude doing something completely insane that I'd never seen before. So I definitely knew it was still going places just by the competition between those two and the other people. And it was around that time, 2015 or 16-ish, that there were a lot more people coming in. It was the top 10 on the leaderboards were filling up with names that I didn't even know. A lot of people were just inspired by seeing the GDQ runs, by watching Simple Dude and Pro JN and all that doing their thing. A lot of people were coming onto the scene around then. And I definitely, I would say in this case, I did expect that the game was going to be taken to places that I wouldn't have expected, just because, just with so much new input, so much input, and so much talent, of course.
Ian, we are still seeing people grind this game. I mean, and so it seems to be, are there still things to discover? Are there still things that can happen in the varying categories for this speedrun? Or, tell what could be the possibility of some of the future for this game?
for sure, I think that there's definitely still stuff to be discovered. Just last year, there was a big discovery that improved a bunch of the up A categories, where it was basically doing some work on the randomizer. It was discovered that so you can place the gem into the statue after beating a boss. And for speedruns, we would, if you didn't need the experience for a level up in certain cases, you might do an up A before the gem hits the top and the experience starts counting up and you get the level up and stuff. And that was also real common in the randomizer that people would do that. But it was discovered that if you up A before the gem hits the top of the statue, you can go back to that statue and place another gem. And so you could effectively go fight Horsehead, place the gem, up A, and just place all 6 gems there right at the start. And then you've placed all the gems, and now you just need the items to let you get into Great Palace. And so we've termed that gem duping. But yeah, effectively you're duping the gems that you can put into a single statue. So that was a really neat thing that changed a lot of the like no major glitches categories in that where we don't actually have to go into all of the palaces. Like you just don't even see Palace 6 at all anymore in some of those categories.
I do have to ask because we just saw a moment, and I don't mean to change the subject too drastically here, but what the heck just happened there, Fiesel, during that boss fight? 'Cause it looked like you almost died. It was very close.
Which is it, the Karak fight?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, what happened was I don't know if this is something that's changed, but when I was running this, you could time your first hit, and after that it was just random what was going to happen next. I don't know if there's any manipulation, but I mean, if your strategy is to go into a corner and crouch, if Karak just keeps appearing on top of you, it's over. So that one was just out of my hands. You just cross your fingers. But maybe it's gotten better since then.
Well, so there has been some research into the RNG about stuff like this. There's been like, there's a route that we do in the All Keys where we get shield after Palace 2 because that allows for a manipulation where you can get the bubble skip. Skip the bubble encounter on the way to the heart container and on the way leaving the heart container. And prior to that, no one would ever try to skip that encounter leaving the heart container square. And so there's stuff like that. There's also a runner did a bunch of analysis on the P bag drops, and there's the skeleton at the top of the elevator in Palace 1 that you would kill after getting the candle. And he found, I forget what the frame number is, but there's a frame that if you kill that enemy on this specific frame, you have a 100% chance of getting a P-bag. And so there's some of these little minor manipulations with the RNG that we've discovered through messing around with some of that stuff. And the same person who did that research into the P-bag drop on that Stalfos started analyzing the spawn patterns of Karak, and we know that there are only 64 different patterns that can appear, but I don't know that anyone's done any
64,
crunching. That's a pretty new finding, is just a couple days ago, posted in the Discord.
Oh, interesting.
So I don't know if anyone's done any crunching of the numbers to figure out like if there's a more optimal place to stand than in the far right corner of the room or whatever. So we may see some new strats develop for the Karak fight in the future.
I don't even know if your movements in that room affect the RNG, or if it is just on a fixed cycle based on the global timer when you enter.
I'm fairly certain it's based on the RNG seed, which that increments every frame it's a known algorithm for how that RNG changes, but it's, as far as I know, it's based off of that. It may be like masking some of the bits to determine which, because there's probably, I don't know exactly how many spaces it can spawn, but I don't know if it can spawn literally anywhere or if it's like only on certain X coordinates that it can spawn. I'd have to look into that.
Yeah, and I'm chuckling because during the break, folks, we were talking about how optimized the speedrunning can get nowadays compared to where it was just 6 or 7 years ago. And the fact that, we've analyzed and we're kind of aware of the algorithm and how it it affects the RNG of the game is kind of mind-blowing,
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm pretty familiar with the ROM, like the ROM image and what the assembly is saying that it's doing in different places and stuff. Like when we get to Palace 6, I've got some fun information about how Barbo works, but
well, I mean, would you mind sharing that? We've gotten through quite a bit here, and I'm curious how, let's keep it going.
So, well, one thing we've discovered, and I'm sure Fiesel knew this at the time of this run with Barba, if you go into the room and don't stop until the screen stops scrolling, then 100% of the time Barba will spawn in the far right pit. And we know that, and that comes from when each time you enter a new room, the RNG resets to a known state, but then it starts, the first byte of the RNG resets to a known state. Wow. And so, because it's like I don't know, it's like a 6 or 8 byte long string, and it just keeps doing a bit shift and with some modification. And so basically only the first, I want to say it's like 12 bits of the whole RNG sequence, it matters for what's going to change in the future. And so based on that, the way it always lines up that Barba spawns in the far right pit 100% of the time if you don't stop the screen from scrolling. But then there are 2 other places that it can spawn because there's 3 pits on the screen. And the way that the game does that is it has a lookup table and it just takes 3 bits, which gives you a number between 0 and 7. So looks up in an 8-element array which one to go to. And so it's 3 entries for pit 1, 2 entries for pit 2, and 3 entries for pit 3. So it actually is least likely to spawn in the center pit.
I have to imagine as a math fan, it's fun discovering some of these things that exist in the game.
Yeah, it was really cool when I was reading the code and figured out exactly how that worked.
Feasel, did you have any sort of knowledge about as you're going to, I mean, I think it's the next palace, but did you have any of that knowledge as far as the Barba fight goes before you did it?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know the specifics. I knew that if you keep the screen scrolling, you can control the first place that Barba is going to spawn, as Ian said. And then I guess my philosophy was, well, just try to kill Barba the first time so you don't have to worry about where it goes next. But, easier said than done.
There was a comment earlier in the chat, and basically this category is don't die, go fast.
Yes.
Sounds right.
Sounds about right.
That's most categories, unless you're taking an intentional death abuse.
Which is why there's differentiation of categories.
Yeah.
It's one of the things that I've really appreciated about a lot of different speedruns, and this is kind of where I think GDQ kind of fits into the overall story of speedrunning, is that with Z2, it's one of those games where if you watch the GDQ runs from 10 to 13 to 12, all these through the years, you can really see the evolution of where the speedrun has gone. And I think that's one thing GDQ does really well, is highlights the evolution of the strats and the routing and all that kind of stuff. And we talked about it, with your run, with your No Major Glitches run from just a little bit ago, because it really highlights where the game has gone. We've broken it apart where you can take on the final boss as one of the first things you do in the game, which is just kind of wild and mind-blowing if you think about it.
Yeah.
Pretty awesome.
That's my favorite category by far, the reverse boss order. And that's one where you're on the edge of your seat pretty much the entire run, because it can go south at pretty much any point. After the Guma fight, that's when I breathe a big sigh of relief, because that's the Thunderbird fight and the Guma fight are the 2 hardest parts of that run.
How many hits is those? I mean, those take so many hits to get through those 2 bosses.
So yeah, it's at attack 4, it's 32 hits on Thunderbird, and then I would be fighting Guma at attack 5, and so that's, I believe, 16 hits, but I don't. It's been a little bit since I've run the category, so I don't quite remember, but I want to say it's 16 hits at attack 5. So.
That reminds me. So, Breakdown, when you first ran this way back when in 2010, were you aware of some of those spawns that could happen, or some of the RNG elements that could happen in boss fights and things like that?
Not mathematically, certainly. Definitely, I don't know, Feasel was talking about save state practice. I didn't even do save state practice when I was initially grinding out this game. I was playing on the GameCube Collector's Edition with a GameCube controller.
Oh, man.
And, my computer setup, I didn't have a computer controller, so I would be a keyboard warrior. And this is a terrible game to be a keyboard warrior on, because left plus right just makes you zip across the screen like a crazy person. So, yeah. I had just anecdotal and observational evidence, but in terms of I definitely couldn't be okay, it's drawing from this table and then there's 3 bits that do this, and then kids gotta divide by 27 and you have this many odds to do this. No, none of that was figuring into the way I approach the game. But that just kind of serves to show how speedrunning in general has evolved. It was mentioned earlier in the green room, actually, just how there's a more systematic and almost mechanical approach to how games work these days. And there's so many people just dedicated to not necessarily like perfecting strats, but just figuring out how things work in a game, to the betterment of the overall finished product of the run. Definitely, because the more you understand why things work, the better you can approach how to do things. And that's just very, very evident in the conversation we're having here today.
I'm glad you brought that up, breakdown, because that's one of the things that I really appreciate and think is such an interesting and strength of the speedrunning community is that, let's say you're the type of person that enjoys going frame by frame, working on a computer, being meticulous, taking a month to figure something out. You can pursue tool-assisted speedrunning. If you're the type of person that enjoys routing, and there are still games that have not been routed out there, you can spend the time and find new ways. If you enjoy glitch hunting, you can go and go see if you can figure out a new way to break a game. If you just enjoy, putting on the best demonstration of the skills that are involved in doing the game, you can do so with a good old RTA speedrun. And I think that's with the growth of the community, I think that's one of its biggest positives and biggest strengths is that no matter how you want to enjoy or to partake in a game, there are these options out there for you. And I think it's really great highlighting some of these early runs to see how it was done. Realistically, 2013 wasn't that long ago, even though in speedrunning time, it feels like it's a lifetime ago at this point. And so to see where it's come from and all these opportunities that are, if you want to get involved in this at all, you really can. And I think that's a really great and wonderful aspect to this whole thing. If you're like Eod and you know more about math than I could ever possibly understand, there are things that you could pursue too as well, which I think is really cool. Is there anything I'm missing, Fiesel, or any behind-the-scenes story that I might be missing from this time period as far as the Zelda 2 stuff goes? I really feel like we've caught a lot.
Zelda 2 stuff. Around this, I think we pretty much covered it all. I do want to shout out Bad Breaks for finding a lot of cool stuff in this game. He would come, in and out of this game, and every time he would start working hard on this game, he would just send me like a dozen videos of brand new strats that he found. I don't know, a lot of his contribution to it needs to be recognized, I think, too.
Yeah, I would say Lord of Ultima as well did a lot with.
Oh yeah.
Particularly some of those RNG manipulation stuff with the overworld spawns and stuff like that.
I'm glad to hear you give those people a shout out because it's not quite often that we hear all of that stuff that happened behind the scenes to get where we are today. So thank you for doing that. That's pretty awesome. I think we're going to start wrapping it up there. I honestly can't thank you all so much for taking us down this road and taking us down memory lane. I know for a lot of us who grew up with Zelda games, Zelda 1 and 2 specifically, these games, at least for me, opened up my mind to the world of possibilities to video games. Don't get me wrong, I loved Mario, loved Mega Man, loved all those type of games. But the idea of Zelda just seemed to open up this world, this imaginary world that you could actually participate in, and that's one of the things I still enjoy about the Zelda games today. That they really capture, if you will, my childhood imagination. So and had I these runs had we not had games done quick back then or other ways of viewing speed runs, I'm not sure I'd be involved. So it's pretty awesome to see where it's come from. Breakdown, any final thoughts? I mean, we've seen you on so many couches over the years. What's it like to see GDQ where it's at today?
It's kind of mind-blowing, honestly. I gotta say, the earlier events that we've been highlighting here, 2015, 2013, 2010, those are special to me, that era of GDQ. It's, from an organization standpoint, we were still figuring things out, but they always came together in such a great way, and it was always such a good time. And, going back and watching these VODs, it definitely is a nostalgia trip for me. So, but I mean, hey, I'm gonna keep on keeping on. Just over inside of a month until the next online event, and yeah, looking forward to that certainly. So here's to many more after that.
I know I've asked you about this before, but was there any possible way of seeing the growth of GDQ? I mean, being there at the very first one and seeing where it's at today?
I would never have guessed it would have come as far as it did, but I'm glad it did, certainly. It's a great thing to have been a part of over the years and to continue to be a part of. And yeah, like I said before, here's to many more.
Fiesel, we've seen you move from the runners, space into commentary. I mean, rarely GDQs go by where we don't see you on the microphone, interviewing people and things like that. What's it like seeing the growth? I mean, from your perspective, Fiesel.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's tough. It's tough to really pinpoint like any spot where I really saw the growth, because it was just so gradual at every step of the way. It was just a slight increase over the last time around, and it's only when you kind of look back and just see how far it came that it really starts to look impressive. But I mean, certainly moving into like the hotels and like as the from 4-H center and moving into better hotels or bigger hotels, and then just seeing the equipment get upgraded year after year and the layout looking nicer year after year. So I mean, little things like that you certainly notice. But yeah, I mean, it all kind of just ramped up smoothly, really, as streaming really started to take off and Twitch really became big.
Eon, we've seen you numerous times performing varying different games here on the GDQ stage, and also Zelda 2. If somebody was interested in this game, where would be like a good place to start? What would be like a run they may want to? What would be a good place to if somebody wanted to pick up the speedrun?
So there's a couple places. We do have a community speedrun Discord, and we have all kinds of resources available there. I don't know if there's a link available somewhere on that, but that's a thing. You can, reach out to anyone speedrunning the game. They'll be able to hand you that. There's also redcandle.us has a lot of good information about speedrunning both Zelda 1 and Zelda 2. And then we have a new community wiki that is still kind of in the works. So a lot of information is still missing from it, but at bindingforce.net, which is a reference to, in the instruction manual, the Great Barrier at the entrance to the Great Palace is referred to as the Binding Force. So,
some great links, and we'll include some of those in the description so we can send people in the right place. I really do appreciate that. And that was, by the way, a good save right there, Fiesel, on I got that bridge at this point of the video. Breakdown, is there any place people can find you if you, I don't know how much you stream nowadays or anything like that, but is anything you'd be interested if you want to link somewhere?
My streams are sporadic, certainly, and usually are variety projects that eventually turn into at least somewhat speedrunning projects. That seems to be the way I roll these days. But you can find me on Twitch at Breakdown777. You can also follow me on Twitter, BreakdownSDA. And yeah, that's what I got.
Fiesel, how about you? Anything with the Speed Game or anything else you'd like to link us to or send people a place to see more stuff?
Well, I'm Fiesel on Twitch if you want to watch any of my old VODs. Right now, most of my work is in Speed Gaming, also on Twitch. Twitch.tv Speed Gaming, that's what I'm doing most of right now. And I don't know, just enjoying life.
Awesome. Eon, where can people find you if they're all interested in this? Or Tetris the Grandmaster, I want to give some shout out to that. Where can people find you on Twitch?
I'll get to that. 1 second, I want to point out there was a very rare thing that just happened on the screen. Fiesel got a fairy spawn in the Valley of Death here, and that's a 1 in 256 chance to get a fairy spawn.
Wow.
So, but yeah, so
awesome.
You can find me on Twitch and Twitter both at EonHeck. That's EONHCK. No E in there because we don't want to be vulgar. And yeah, I do a lot of Zelda 2 and Tetris the Grandmaster. I've kind of been focused a bit more on Tetris lately. Streams have been kind of sporadic, but should be picking back up with frequency soon. So.
Well, thank you all so much for joining here today. And thank you out there, folks, for watching and being here and spending a little bit of time as we relive some classic games done quick moments. That's going to be it for us. Just a couple of quick shout outs and announcements here before we get going. If you're at all interested in any of this type of conversational speedrunning stuff, I host a podcast. It's called Sequence Break Podcast, and that's where you can find interviews very similar to what you're hearing here. So if you're at all interested in this stuff, there's over 50 episodes now at this point where we just chat with speedrunners and talk in depth like this. We geek out on the speedrunning, if you will. For those of you that are curious, we do have Frame Fatales coming up very soon on August 15th through the 21st. If you're at all interested for more information on that, go to gamesdonequick.com/Frame Fatales. This one this year is called Flame Fatales. Pretty cool name. And also, I just want to give a quick shout out to all of you watching, supporting, subbing. All of that kind of stuff goes a long way to help support the content you are watching right now here on the GDQ Hotfix. Thank you so much. We really do appreciate it. This program and all of the programs like it are only able to be possible with the support of folks like you. Tomorrow, coming up, is the start of Ocean Week, where we've partnered with the Monterey Bay Aquarium for ocean-themed speedruns. Please do tune in at 7 p.m. Eastern for the community spotlight. It'll be a lot of fun. You're not going to regret it. Big shout out to Railkun behind the scene, producing the whole thing. Thank you so much. That is going to be it for us. We do a Games Done Classic about once a month. You'll see it in the promotional materials for whenever it pops up. It kind of does change from time to time depending on special events that are happening. So once again, my name is Lad Mackey. Thank you so much for being here and supporting. We hope you have a good rest of your evening, weekend, day, week, month, year. Thank you so much and have a good night. See y'all later. Bye-bye.